Hey guys, welcome back to the Co-Travel Podcast with Bob Piercy. Happy to be back here again with Samantha Leonard, co-founder of Stream Dental HR. Samantha, thanks for doing this again.
Yeah, no, this is always so much fun to be back with you and talk about some really exciting topics.
Well, you know what? HR has never looked better. Um, and and yeah, you do own the record right now for 2021 for most frequent guests. But I do think that the conversations we've had have been important and timely and also enjoyable and informative. So yeah, happy to have you back on as many times as long as we can kind of keep this going. Before we jump into it, I'm just kind of curious, like it's April, it's springtime. We just got through winter. Like, how are you and your husband doing? How are you guys managing spring? Any big plans for summer this year?
Oh, well, I'm sure everybody feels this way right now where it's been kind of hard to make any plans, right? Everything just continues to change. But, Tyler and I, we love just exploring our backyard. There's just so many places to go and see. And, we're both born and raised here in Calgary, and there's still so many places we have yet to visit and explore. So that's our goal, is just taking our little Frenchie with us and just trying to find some new places to go hike and explore. How about you guys?
Your little French bulldog.
Yeah, our little Frenchie, Mr.
Well,
Chester.
Mr. Chester. Well, I've got a 95-pound husky mix
Oh,
who's a rescue and a
cute.
little football with legs, a little husky Malamute thing. But and you know which one's the boss. It's always the little
Yeah.
dog is the boss.
Oh, he sure is. He sure is.
Yeah, for sure. So hey, the thing that kind of spawned this conversation, this podcast, this episode today, is that we were actually on a Zoom call with you, like our sales team, earlier in the week, and we're talking about these new occupational health and safety requirements that are coming down for dentists, and the concern is that what's actually being asked and required of dental offices to comply with this really isn't fully understood,
Mhm.
and there could be some consequences to not complying, and especially not complying in time. And we thought that jumping on, having a conversation, just what is actually required. So
Mhm.
offices, again, we got 6 months roughly to get this done. But there's a lot of work that needs to get done if they haven't started right now, correct?
Correct. Yeah. And, like you were mentioning, last November, I believe it was, when the Alberta Dental Association and college had made that announcement about their changes about how they can renew, or what the new requirements are in place to be able to renew their practice permit for the following year. And I think a lot of practices were pretty surprised with this questionnaire. It's very lengthy that they need to go through and make sure that they're adhering and make sure that they have the proper protocols and policies that are listed in there. And one of them is occupational health and safety. So that's been a very big misconception of really what is that? Is it just a one standalone policy saying, everybody on my team must be safe and treat each other well and don't be mean to one another, and that's enough of what we need for health and safety? And I think even with what we've seen with COVID, there's just been so many changes for health and safety requirements. And now the ADA&C just wants to make sure that every business is operating and keeping not only their patients safe, but their team safe, and most importantly, really protecting the business.
Oh, it's obviously this past over 12 months now too. It's just
Yeah.
been a whirlwind. It's flown by, and really, I think all of us have just been in survival mode for this
Mhm.
this time period. And I think back to a conversation I had earlier, actually on this podcast, but it was in reference to just like the timeline that we're on. Is we don't know when this is going to end. We
Mhm.
really don't. There's hope on the horizon. Vaccines are coming out. I know my parents have been vaccinated. Now people with different disabilities and health concerns are being vaccinated. So it is disseminating down. But again, we don't have an end date. And the one story that kind of made me kind of realize my mental approach to how I'm changing it is, we always used to say, "Oh, come spring or come summer." We put a date on
Mhm.
it, and then
Mhm.
those dates have come and gone, and we're still here. Um, the story that I heard goes back to the Korean War, and a U.S. Fighter jet pilot was shot down, and he spent 7 years. I think it was 7 years in a POW camp, and
Wow.
he got out, survived, and now he's written books and he speaks at colleges, and he's asked, like, how did you survive? And he said that he didn't put a date on it. He just knew that his greatest day was going to be when he got out, and what he did after. But the people that suffered the most were the optimists in the camp. There are other prisoners that said, oh, we'll get out
Right.
by Thanksgiving, we'll get out by Christmas.
Right.
And
And
when
that
those
goes.
dates
Mhm.
came and went, and they're still in camp, that just really crushed their soul. So
Mhm.
I was guilty of saying, oh, come spring, come, but now I'm just like, look, like this is going to end, but we do need to survive this. And
Mhm.
I think a lot of offices obviously were just in survival mode, trying to get through this past 12 months. I'm sure a lot of them have just, they know about this, but again, it hasn't seemed to be a priority because of COVID. But again, the clock is still ticking on this. This needs to get done. So again, we want to do it properly. So
Mhm.
like, what is involved in OH&S that people don't realize, and how do
Mhm.
we help people get past the goal line on this?
Yeah. No, I think like you said, it's this unknown and ambiguity of what health and safety is. And I think that it's because a lot of times when we talk about occupational health and safety, we think about other industries, right? Like construction or oil and gas rigs where they use heavy machinery or things could blow up and people could die. But really, occupational health and safety programs are designed for any business to be able to provide the protocols, the policies, to be able to prevent any type of illness, injury, or deaths in the workplace. And it's essentially just how are we keeping everybody safe? What's our procedures for doing so? How are we going to practice to make sure everybody's trained up properly? So if this worst case scenario ever happened, we are ready and we're prepared. And when we start to think about some of the hazards that exist within the dental practice, there are several biological, physical, chemical, ergonomic, and psychological hazards that are present every single day and we're being exposed to. So, if we think about it, we're seeing dozens and dozens and dozens of patients every single day.
Mhm.
And those patients are coming in and, we are being exposed to occupational hazards of like infectious diseases, right? Like bloodborne diseases, things like AIDS and HIV and hepatitis, but then we're also exposed to respiratory diseases like tuberculosis and now COVID-19. And then once we start thinking about, if our office has oxygen tanks or compressed gas like nitrous,
Mhm.
then there's potential hazards of that, leaking. Or if there was a fire in the workplace, guess what those compressed gases do? They blow up, right? Or, if we start thinking about Susie, who is, working at the front desk alone while all of her team members are eating lunch in the back, now she's technically working alone. And if somebody comes in as an unauthorized intruder or potentially robs her, like these are all hazards that exist day in and day out within the workplace. So we need our practice to be prepared. OHS to me is like your insurance policy. You don't get that call the insurance company when your house is on fire. You need to have it ahead of time.
Yeah, and I think that last little analogy is just perfect. Like, you don't want to be the one running into any emergency and building the emergency plan as you go in. You want to have those steps in place. And again, it creates a calmness when that environment, when that does happen, because again, you have a plan and people are educated on
Mhm.
their roles in the plan.
Yep.
And again, it just goes more smoothly. And again, plan for the worst, hope for the best. Hopefully none of this
Mhm.
ever becomes a requirement or something you need to go back and rely on. But again, you want to have that in your back pocket, just in case. It's
That's
that
right.
get out of jail free card in a sense. So
Yeah, there's just too much at risk, right?
absolutely, yeah.
Like you said, if that what if scenario happens, and if there was an illness, injury, or death, the penalties of that, if they come in after this, incident had occurred, they see that there's no OHS documents, there's never been any training, nobody's ever received any policies or protocols, and now this person is hurt because of this, then that practice is deemed negligent. So there's things like stop work orders. They could potentially be fined. There's tickets. There's even jail time if that, if that goes to, if there was a fatality in the work site. Like, so there's just way, way too much at risk that we want to make sure that if that worst case scenario happens, we're not caught off guard. And, maybe that incident could have easily been prevented.
And like a dentist is always supposed to prescribe multiple treatment options to a patient. And here's the best option. Here's what I would do with my own family. Here's option B. Here's option C. And you're supposed to give the patient the chance to choose. And that's great if the doctor does that, but the doctor also needs to document it in their software that they gave a choice, and quite often it require a signature that the patient signs that they received these choices and they chose option A, B, or C. Because again, if the patient comes back, weeks, months, or years later and claims that they didn't, then if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. And
Yeah.
now the doctor's, in a dispute with a patient. So the best thing is to be prepared in advance, have it, and again, you're just protected going forward. So what types of things do you think offices don't really fully understand about these new regulations, what's being asked of them, and what do they need to do to actually comply?
Yeah, and that's a great analogy, right? Because like you said, all of those pieces requires a different step and a different resource if you are presenting multiple treatment options and for the patient to accept it. So it's very similar to OHS. There are actually 8 key fundamental pieces that practices must have within their health and safety program. So, most people are probably automatically thinking about their occupational health and safety manual. And with the occupational health and safety manual, that's where it needs to be very, very practice specific, right? It's because every office uses different chemicals, different instruments, there's different hazards within every single office. So that needs to be very specific to the hazards that are within their office, their policies, their procedures, and it also needs to be compliant with federal, provincial, and municipal regulations. So kind of give you a little, a high level overview of what should be included in an OHS manual is essentially any work practice or procedures when it comes to, employees working alone. Like we were talking about, we thought about Susie, she's technically not alone. She's still in the office, but OHS Act still considers somebody working alone if they're the only person in that area and, could be vulnerable to any specific things that could potentially happen and nobody can hear that other person. Right. Or is around to be able to witness it. So that person is considered to be working alone. And that happens all the time in our office. So we need to have workplace working alone policies. We also need to make sure that the psychological hazards are covered. So that includes bullying, that includes sexual harassment, respect in the workplace. We also need to have certain housekeeping and hygiene policies as well. So if we have a janitorial service that comes in, we need to have this documented on what needs to be cleaned, disinfected, and sanitized so that we're covering all of the bases to make sure that the biological and chemical hazards have been eliminated every single day. And then also things that you need to do on what your practice is doing to be able to constantly inspect the work site, to do audits, what our due diligence process is to make sure that we're constantly either controlling or eliminating those hazards, and what hazards exist, right? So just those few policies is only one section in our OHS manual, and that covers about 20 pages out of 113 pages that are in our occupational health and safety manuals for our clients.
And you just answered my next question. Like how big is this manual? So really, so if an office has a couple of pieces of loosely stapled together, that's not a manual. That you just know straight up that's not going to be compliant with what's actually required. So 113 pages. Wow. I guess what else? What else is in that document that offices again? And sorry, when does this need to be completed by again?
So in order to be compliant with the new ADA and C changes, their practice visit questionnaire is due November 1st. So
November
that's 6
1st.
months away.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So, okay, we got 113 pages to write between now and November 1st. You just said we discussed just covered 20 pages or so. Like, what else do we need to be putting in this document?
Yeah, so other things that should be included in those documents are essentially anything that is documenting the hazards, and then our emergency response plans to those hazards. And then we also, so that's just the manual. All the other things that you're going to need other documents on top of that to be able to make sure that policies, you've got all the supplementary documents to be able to ensure that you're actually implementing and enforcing this. So for example, if the occupational health and safety manual talks about, okay, if there's, maybe in the respectful workplace policy, it's talking about that if you feel discriminated against or, want to, raise your complaint or an issue that potentially has happened and want the practice to do an investigation on it, then you need to have those report forms. Then you need to have investigation report forms. So there are plenty of other documents that need to go in conjunction and work with your occupational health and safety manual.
Oh wow! So this is again now we're well over 100 pages now.
Oh
So
yes, very easily, very easily. So, and the other piece too is that a lot of practices aren't aware of is you actually need a dedicated health and safety officer in the workplace. So somebody who is their sole responsibility is to ensure the enforcement and continuous compliance of this. So if it's an office that has less than 20 employees, you need to have one occupational health and safety representative. But if your office is bigger than 20 employees, you actually need to have a committee, which is much different. And even just the way that the people who are on it are different, and they have to get nominated and have to do monthly meetings and have meeting books. Like it's much more than just a couple pages, like you were saying.
okay, so I know of several offices that I deal with that would require this committee, you say. So how big is this committee? And like, does it grow based on like 20, 30, 40, like 50 employees? Like,
Yes, essentially the committees have to represent like the actual team, like the workplace and their workers on site. So let's say, for example, if they're, in and aroundish 20, 30, 40, you need to have at least two co-chairs. And one of them needs to be elected by the workers, and one of them needs to be chosen by the employer. So essentially it's somebody who represents the worker and somebody who represents management. And then those monthly meetings need to be conducted. There's several things that need to be reviewed in their agenda. And then minutes need to be kept. And then they also need to file report forms as well.
wow. And now obviously offices or doctors that own multiple clinics, you would need to have at least one person per location, and then but possibly a second person on a location again, if that location's over 20 people.
So this is where it really also depends on how that office is kind of structured. So for example, if that office is under one umbrella, one corporation, and everybody's payroll, let's say even if you have 5 locations and you have 50 employees and they're all under one payroll, then that practice location is considered 50 total. So then you need to have, like you said, equal amount of representatives for each location, and then also equal amount from that management team. But if that office is kind of split up a little bit different and one corp runs this and one corp runs that, then essentially it's just what's on your payroll.
Okay. All right. So again, the owners need to kind of know how their corporation is structured and make sure that this is tailored to that structure as well. So, okay.
Exactly.
One thing you mentioned earlier, just about documenting, but also, and you talked about running drills. I was actually on a Zoom earlier in the week, and with a bunch of office managers, and they were talking amongst themselves and talking about running drills and fire drills. And when do they need to actually like physically leave the location, go to like the designated muster point, and do this, or can they simply just like, be in a room and just like talk through the drill, or do they actually need to physically do the drill?
Yeah, the actual, you have to pretend like you are going through that emergency in order for the team members to, really fully understand and comply. And, they have physically been taken to that muster point and know where that is. So in that way, when that scenario does happen, they've got that, essentially it's kind of the same principle as, when we were in school, right? We all had to go through that dreaded fire drill and, go outside and find to that point until it was safe to come back in. So it's very similar where, those emergency response plans. So, doing the drills like fire, power loss, floods, if there's an unauthorized intruder, medical emergencies. And if a practice does sedation dentistry, then the emergency drills that they have to do are much more comprehensive than that. And it has to be done once every 6 months, and that has to be documented as well.
Wow. Okay. So again, yeah, right there, like I can go back to this group of managers, and because again, a lot of them are just talking about talking through the drill in a because they didn't want to get up and go outside, and especially if it's wintertime, you need to do the drill. It's cold out. All right. So we need to actually go through full execution of these drills and like say document it for it to be compliant. That's a great point.
One more thing I want to add to that
Yeah,
as
please.
well is not only do they have to run it, but that document, it actually needs to be a physical written plan. So essentially that plan, like those health and safety reps or those committees their responsibility is to make sure that that plan is written, it's accessible, everybody knows where they can find it. And so because their responsibility is to equip and train the workers and the team. So we need to make sure that that emergency response plan is also another part that is part of their occupational health and safety program.
Now, okay, let's take the example of just a medium-sized solo office. So let's say 6 operatories, you got a couple hygienists, a couple assistants, doctor, maybe an associate. Let's not worry about the large DSOs or mega practices. So you've got one person who's responsible for doing this because you're less than 20 employees.
Mhm.
Like, how much time a week or a month is it required for them to work on this? Because again, I'm thinking this is automatically going to fall on the office manager if they have one, or the office type lead person if they don't have that exact role. But this person already has a full-time job.
Mhm.
So how much time is really expected of them to do this properly? Because again, there is a lot weighing on this being done properly, because if it's not, there's risk on the backside. So how much time?
Yeah. So I would say the heavy load and the heavy lifting is really at the beginning to build all of this.
Okay.
And then and then afterwards it's more doing checkpoints, right? So it's like a weekly, a monthly check-in, and then also making sure that if there are any new hazards that are introduced into the work site. So let's say, for example, now we're doing implants. And so now we're using different types of instruments. And now there's more chance that we could potentially, have needle stick injuries. So now we need to train the team on that and have a protocol for it. So it's, building it's the heavy lifting. And then afterwards, it's mostly just going to be, I would probably say, an hour or 2 a week. And then monthly, it's just going to be doing our due diligence and our checklist. And then just, every year and to be able to do a hazard assessment and a risk assessment within the workplace. So definitely varies from week to week, month to month. But the big component is building this.
And now, how many have you built to date? Kind of, how many of these have you guys prepared for offices in Alberta?
I would probably say in this last year, we've done a couple of hundred occupational health and safety programs.
And now, every office is different, I get, but how much of this is how much of these are boilerplate? Can you just because again, there has to be repetitive portions, but truly, how independent, how specialized is each location versus how boilerplate could this be?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would definitely say that the OH&S is really just about, the head part is really about the legislation, right? So the majority of that is, this is what legislation is. What is your practice doing to be compliant with it?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not, here's what we recommend. And then we need that specific information to fill that in. So in that way, it's very, very comprehensive for anyone to be able to understand, hey, okay, if there's an incident here, if there was a gas leak, or if there was a need for first aid, I know here's the steps that we need to take. We've been trained on it, right? So it's just all of those pieces to really just make that complete. Because other than that, if a practice downloads a template, it's really not going to help them out if there was an incident that happened. Because if you have an investigation come in, they're going to follow what you have written down. And if you have veered from that or have not done it according to that, then that's when you have again, that negligent piece. That's when you're not following your own policies, and it's really important to make sure that it's very, very specific to your practice on the actual protocols and procedures itself.
Now, you talk about downloading a template. You told me in our previous conversation too that some offices are downloading this 25-page document that is actually on how to create this, but they're misidentifying this as the solution. And
Right.
so,
Yeah.
Again, this document that needs to be created is over 100 pages long, but there's offices out there that they're downloading this template.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that template? Yeah, please.
So it's I believe it's called the Dental Workers Guide to Occupational Health and Safety, and I believe it was written back in 2011. So
Okay.
again, a lot has happened in 10 years.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, of course, it's really important. That guide is great to be able to walk you through step by step how to identify what hazards exist in the workplace, how to do risk assessments, what you must do every single year with those risk assessments. So it's a great tool, and it'll provide you quick little, you know, here's a graph, or here's a sample report form. But again, it's just pointing you in that right direction of what you need to do. Very similar to how the ADA&C has provided the IPC standards and guidelines, which is 106 pages, but it's stepping you through on what needs to be included and all the details that should be included in that particular section. But the practice still has to go and make it very specific to their protocols and policies.
Now, on the couple hundred of these that you guys have created, like how much time does it actually take to create one of these documents front to back?
Well, if a practice was to try to do this on their own, a minimum, it would take them about 100 hours just for the occupational health and safety manual. That doesn't include creating all of the other report forms, workplace injury programs, emergency response plans, COVID-19 safety plans. So that's just the OH&S manual. And I mean, that's just researching the code, looking up what the legislation is, trying to put that into their own words, then trying to build that and train their team. So a minimum of 100 hours for a practice to try and do that on their own.
Wow. And again, like you say, once you get that done, the maintenance is reasonable for amount of time. But again, for an office manager or a doctor and owner to build this, you know, we already have a full schedule. We already have, you know, friends and family, and you gotta scratch out 100 hours between now and November 1st. So talk about what Stream Dental is doing. So obviously you guys do this. You guys do meet with offices. What does that process look like for the practice who is interested in talking to you? Like, walk me through that, from the discovery phase to the final document being done to, you know, after the document. What does that whole process and relationship look like with you guys?
Yeah, for sure. So they'll start off by talking either with myself, Brianna, or somebody on our growth team. And what we really try and focus on is we really want to understand the practice's immediate HR and health and safety needs. So we kind of do what we call a health and safety checkup. So we'll just kind of see what they have in place, see where their growth plans are, because maybe they're on that little threshold right now that they're 19 employees, but in the next 6 months they need to bring on somebody else, or somebody's coming back from mat leave. So then now it's really identifying what exactly do they need for their practice. Once they sign on with us, then they start working right away with our health and safety team. So again, it kind of, like you were saying, it's that discovery phase. It's really identifying, you know, what are current policies within the practice? How do they want that specifically structured? You know, here's best practices. If that has never been thought of, or that training has never been done, hey, here's, you know, what we recommend. And then we start building all of those resources. Now, what we found is, you know, we really want to take that time to educate and empower the practice owner and the health and safety representative, because they're the ones who's going to be managing this. So we want them to really understand what the legislation pieces are, what they must do to be compliant, and kind of do an if this scenario happens, then do that. If this happens, then do that, right? So we want to have them feel confident in managing this. So we actually review the policies. We help educate them on the legislation. We show them all the different forms. And if there was an incident that happened, or if there was a chemical spill, or, you know, if somebody slipped and fell, like, here's the forms that you're going to need to do. This is the process. And then afterwards, we actually help provide the training that they need for their team. So giving them a high level overview of what health and safety is, what the requirements of from their employer, from the health and safety, like the supervisors, and then also what's required of them as an employee, because they still have to do what they can to follow these policies and keep everybody safe. And then we also do some monthly directives. So we're going to be reminding the health and safety representative, hey, this month, remember, we need to do that general hazard assessment. Here's that document. Here's a quick video on how you can do that. And then we also support them. We're an occupational health and safety training center. So we can also help them when it comes to doing their WMIS training, to doing their emergency preparedness training. You know, we even have specific training and certifications for joint health and safety committees and health and safety representatives, because I know we didn't really talk about this, but they actually need to go through 16 additional hours of training every single year so that they're up to date with the health and safety legislations. So we also provide that support as well for them, and are an approved training center.
And so that 16 hours, that's for the health and safety officer in the practice, and or the
Right,
health and safety committee if the practice
right,
requires a committee. Um,
exactly.
and you guys provide that training as well. And then I guess now, how is this document going to change? After it's completed. Obviously, new employees coming on. People leaving. Procedures in the practice changing. And I guess again, just general. As time goes by, like what else is going to need to be done to this document
Yeah.
throughout the life of the business?
All of those points, like you said, right? It's a living, breathing document. There's specific trainings and things that need to be reviewed by new employees. So when we work with an office, we give them that onboarding checklist, and then we give them all of the resources that are listed on there. I believe there's 25. So we put all the steps that they need to do to properly onboard that new team member. And then, like you said, if there's any changes, if there's new hazards that have been introduced into the practice, then that needs to be updated, and everybody needs to be trained on it and signed off on it. And then obviously we've seen a ton of changes over this last year, and I'm sure we're going to see more with legislation. So that also needs to be updated as that happens. So in that way, everybody, has reviewed those, they understand these new requirements or these new changes and sign off on it. And that's everything that we also provide our practices that sign on with us. We're the ones who take care of all that legislation changes. We do annual compliance reviews with them as well, just to make sure that all those I's are dotted, T's are crossed, and they have that peace of mind, and they don't have to worry about that. They can just focus on dentistry, and we take care of that health and safety and HR for them.
And like all the doctors I know, that's predominantly what they want to do. They just want to focus on dentistry. They just want to treat their patients, take care of their team the best that they can. They want to provide for their families. And again, it just seems that more and more stuff gets piled on and requirements that need to be done
Oh,
now.
yeah.
And it's hard to argue again. Infection control protocols. I think those are outdated, and they were changes. Now people have, was it too much? Was it not enough? But again, it was needed. Information protection. Again, it's another thing, but again, it's important. And now this, and this isn't just dentistry. Like this is needed to be done for all businesses and all industries. But again, there's just so much more being put on dentists to just run a business that weren't required 20 years ago.
Right.
And again, we only have 24 hours in a day. We only got so much, time in our lives to do this stuff. Now, I'm hesitant asking you this just because I've never wanted this podcast to be a big sales pitch. So about, I guess, what does this cost? Like, what does this cost for an office to get Stream Dental HR to take you guys from A to Z? And then are there any ongoing costs, after this document's being completed? Like what else is out there? Because again, and then I guess my second question I'm going to ask you is, for the people in the office, these OH&S committees, should a doctor be paying this employee over and above to do that role? So take them in whichever order you want, and that's kind of what do you think?
Okay. So I'm sure practice owners, as soon as you heard they heard that last part of the question, they're like, I want that answer first.
Okay.
So essentially, you don't have to pay them. So let's say, for example, if this is a dental assistant, that's $25 an hour. We don't have to pay them $28 an hour to be able to perform these. But obviously, we want to make sure that they have to be paid for this time. So even if it's outside of clinical time, that's the time that they're using to be able to catch up. It's a mandatory requirement. This is a part of the business. In order for the business to operate and comply with laws, they have to be paid for that. And even during their training, they have to be paid their regular rate for these, mandated requirements for training and for them to be educated on those legislation pieces. So I'm not too sure if that's the answer. If that's what you were.
Yeah, I think so. Just,
Okay.
I'm already paying, an employee to be there 8 hours a day so now do I just take them out of the operatory and give them and time, and so that I'm paying them the same wage? or is this going to require extra time that requires, overtime pay? Or, and again, if you're a busy clinic with busy employees who already have full-time jobs, you know, not that you need to necessarily bring on a part-time person, but again, offices are busy. They run on as tight of a budget as possible because they're trying to balance everything. And now we're putting more on the practice. And so something has to give. And it's either someone is not going to be able to do a job they're currently doing, or we need to pay someone either outside office hours to comply with this requirement. So just trying to figure out what's the best solution for a practice.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's something that, again, like you said, they need to really review the workload of their existing team members. I always recommend that, for example, a practice also needs to have somebody who's like your sterilization lead, right? So somebody who's going to take on that role and responsibility to, again, make sure that the sterilization logs are kept, that the monthly maintenance is done. So essentially, it's kind of that same thing that we also need to communicate with our team to be able to see and say, hey, we need somebody who's going to be the health and safety supervisor. Mm-hmm. So this is something that's a part of our business. Hopefully we'll be able to find somebody who will volunteer for that position or for that roles and responsibilities of that health and safety supervisor, and then being able to provide them with that, extension on their job descriptions of this new role. And then also, that necessary training and support system that they need to be able to perform this. And then hopefully being able to come up with a way of, hey, okay, maybe once a week or once a month, let's just pre-block off 2 hours. So in that way, you're not seeing patients and we're just kind of dedicated on this time, but this is, we can give those patients who you would be seeing to somebody else, right? So there's definitely a way to be able to kind of work things around and hopefully have the entire team pull in, just so that person has that dedicated time to manage those duties now.
Yeah, because in a lot of cases, I'm imagining that we really are creating a new position in the practice. Again, it's not a full-time position, not even a part-time position, but this isn't, in terms of infection control, you already have someone who's dedicated to sterilization. So now with that protocol, you're just adding documentation onto the job that they're doing. But with OH&S, like this is, if they've never had an OH&S officer or manual or, or committee for that matter, they really are creating a new position that's going to require new time to fulfill the requirements. So, okay, so great. That was question 2. Question 1, like again, what is it going to cost the dental office to have you guys do it? And really, why should Stream Dental HR be the ones to do this?
Yeah. So let me tack on that part first. So just like it's listed in our name, we specialize and we work with dental practices. Now, that really gives us we have that background as well of working in dentistry. So I know I've talked about this in other podcasts, but my former role was a dental assistant. I was an operational manager for a group orthodontic practice. So, really knowing what are the hazards in the workplace, the dynamics of the workplace, and just really what happens day in and day out in a dental office really helps us make sure that this is specific and it covers all the what if scenarios. So our team just works only with dental offices. And so, we're very, very well versed in that and really make sure that the legislation, they're going to be compliant with that legislation. So when we're working with the practice, like I mentioned to you before, it takes them 100 hours to try and do this and figure out just the manual on their own. Now, if a practice is producing around $500 an hour, now that office manager, let's say, is being taken away from that role that's driving the business forward, that's actually bringing in $500 an hour. So that's $50,000 that they are potentially losing in production. And paying that office manager. So now we're probably, let's say, for example, going in around $65,000 of what it might be costing them to try and do that on their own. Versus us, it's $380 a month. Mm-hmm. That's it.
And how long is it going to take you guys to do this on average?
Yeah, so it typically takes us, when we're working with the practice, about 6 weeks. Okay. To work with them, not only to develop everything, but then also to work with them on a weekly basis to, again, go through that training, help them set it up, help them roll it out to their team. And then after that, we turn into that monthly support We help them with any, we have the on-call HR and OH&S advisors for them. We also have a software that has all of our our OH&S trainings on there for them as well. They can store their HR library, their employee files, and manage all of the trainings and like that through there as well. And then also we do the compliance in the annual legislation updates for them.
And well, that's a lot.
Yep.
Which is fantastic. And so $300 a month to kind of for this service. Again, it's just ongoing payment, and a lot of things are going to subscription services these days too. So I guess I see the logic behind this. And really, again, it's they're getting the entire team of Streamline HR for this cost, as opposed to trying to hire someone or dedicate someone in office to do this, where you guys have obviously the vast experience behind you. And again, the purpose of today's conversation really was to draw put a spotlight on this whole requirement, because again, the concern that you guys have, that we've had, is that offices don't really know what is being asked of them. There's going to be a time crunch, and it always seems that it's going to get down to the last minute where everyone's trying to get this done so that they can be. And again, a doctor's license renewal is contingent on this being completed. So and we don't know to what extent that's going to be enforced. But again, plan for the worst, hope for the best, I guess. Is there anything we haven't discussed today that you wanted to kind of make sure that, again, bring a light on, bring mention to the doctors and offices should be aware of?
Yeah, I would say, just like we were kind of discussing, just the OH&S component of this is that it's really, really important for a practice to make sure that all of those bases are covered. And we just can't leave that up for, like the analogy that you were giving earlier of just that one day, right? Like one day I'm going to do this, one day it's going to happen. Like you said, things come and go. Look what happened last year. In a matter of one day, our entire life and our business has changed overnight. And many practices were not ready for that. And if we think about their occupational health and safety program, that's like their disaster program that mitigates the risk. It's their crisis management playbook. It's the what if scenario GPS navigator. Like it's super important for a practice to make sure that they have these pieces, and we can't let that go by another day, another month, because who knows what's going to happen. But we just want to make sure that we've got that insurance policy in place. And also another thing to be cognizant of is that because of this pandemic, I think employees know their rights a lot more now. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes if they don't feel safe, or they feel that something's not being compliant with, the new legislation changes that they're aware of, it's really important to make sure as well that this also goes beyond just protecting the business. This is also showing your team, hey, I'm doing what I can, and I'm trying to make sure everybody's protected here. So when they see that you're working with a company to help them make sure they've got their I's dotted and T's crossed, that gives them that reassurance that the doc that I'm working with and working for, they really have our best interests at heart. And as well as protecting my family, it's protecting the patients, it's protecting the community, right? So it goes beyond just the policies that it's written on, but it's really just what we can do and what our business should be known for, of being able to not only provide beautiful smiles, but just keeping everybody safe and healthy.
And, and this is a small industry, like, dentistry, people talk, and it is a really, really small, tightly knit community. And, in regards to offices, like we hear it all the time where hygienists or assistants, employees of offices, they have opinions, and they spread, which is a good clinic to work for, which one is a tougher clinic to work for, the pros and cons. And it's a lot of things. It could be, from compensation, it could be from, a workplace environment. It could, there's so much that goes into making an office a desirable place to work. And again, I think, what you talked about, again, this could be something that would help an office separate themselves to be, a desirable place to work, because the employees feel protected and taken care of, versus an office that, might shoot from the hip and not be as compliant, or be, again, it's something that's going to, add to the resume of the clinic for, again, hiring and retaining employees. So I think it's important. Sure. The one question I wanted to ask you is just I've had a few conversations about stream dental HR, and just kind of dispel some myths and just kind of like, if an office employs you for their services, the concern was that they also need to employ a lawyer to review and write documents and approve stuff, and so there's added costs. Now, is that true? Like,
No.
no, okay.
So you're looking at me
I
and
can
I'm
see you
shaking my
shaking
head.
your
I'm like,
head,
oh,
but I
right,
can't
I'm
hear
on a
you shaking your
podcast.
head. So verbally shake your head to this. So
No. So all of our documentation that are created by a chartered HR professional. So they have gone to school, they know employment standards and legislation inside and out. So, I want everybody to rest assured that everything is going to, meet those requirements and those standards. Now, there are times where we may recommend a practice to reach out to their lawyer, especially if they come to us and they're already in the middle of this big dispute with an existing team member. And let's say, for example, this team member has no employee handbook, they've never signed an employment agreement, and now there's this back and forth and there's nothing in writing. So this is where we may defer to a lawyer and say, hey, for best practices, I'm sure you've heard this many, many times from me, and I'm hoping that this comes across, is that we try to mitigate risk as much as possible. And so that's what we're going to lean towards. So we may defer to a lawyer and say, hey, just to cover all your bases, let's just make sure, in absence of a written agreement or in absence of this, what's the best way to solve this problem? And then we will help, support that lawyer in supporting that practice in that regards. But other than that, everything is compliant. It's written by a professional. I know I have a former background in dental assisting, but I'm not the ones writing your documents. We have a team of HR professionals who will be able to do that for you.
no, great. Yeah, I think that's very well said. And again, it's just, let's just dispel any myths and just let's get it out there.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, hey, again, thank you so much for doing this. I really enjoyed it. It's always fun to get on. And the funny thing is, like, we've talked so many times this year already, but we've never actually met. And so here's to the day when we can actually sit down and meet in person. That'll be a fun day. And it'll be well deserved. I guess anyone has any questions in pricing, please, guys, reach out to Samantha directly. I believe there are actually promotions and discounts for Henry Schein clients. So
yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Yes, we love Bob. We love your clients. We love Henry Schein, and what Henry Schein is just so committed to supporting our industry, and especially like you said, these are some really tough times, and we're all just doing our best to try and grow and try and recover and just trying to get through this. And so that's why we love being partnered up with you guys and helping your clients. So we do have a special discount for Schein clients. So if you hear about us through this podcast, just make sure that you heard about us. So in that way you can get that special discount.
And I think every little bit will be appreciated right now. So again, thanks so much for doing this. You guys, please reach out. I'll include all of Samantha's information, the links, socials down in the show notes. And yeah, let's get on with the week. Have a great week. Hopefully get a nice sunny weekend, and you can get the dog out and have some fun. And yeah, I guess until next time, let's stay safe. So thanks so much.
Thank you. This was fun.
Okay, talk to you later.